Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Achieve More podcast. My name is Anthony, and you can find me on YouTube at Picksburgh, where my girlfriend and I do a lot of cool travel videos. And it's also the video home of this podcast. If you want to see how incredibly handsome Michael and I are, that's where you'll have to come find it. Because Spotify, you're only going to hear our handsome voices that are super soothing. But if you want the full effect, you're going to have to come over to YouTube so you can experience all of this man we have going on over here. But again, my co-host Michael over there at Huddle Card Collection. How you doing today, Michael?
Great, Anthony. How are you, buddy?
Very good, brother. It's always honor to have you on with me. For anybody that doesn't know, Michael hosts a podcast himself over on Huddle Card Collection on YouTube. It's a live stream he does every single Wednesday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where he talks sports cards, collectibles, actually making money off of those collectibles via eBay and other channels. So it's a very exciting show. He brings on a lot of industry experts and stuff like that. So make sure you check out Collecting Profit every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Without further ado, we have a very special guest on with us today. Happy to introduce Henry Woodman. He is a television producer and an entrepreneur, and he has a lot of great information to share with us today. Henry, for anyone who's new to you, if you wouldn't mind just giving them a quick rundown of who you are and kind of what you do, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Yeah. And after that intro, I'll also say face for radio. Okay. That was from years ago. The best way would probably be I'm a hedonistic and opportunistic entrepreneur who's now sort of gone full circle to close my last chapter, which is the TV production thing. So, there's a lot to unpack in there, so I don't want to just ramble on. You guys feel free to ask the questions and I'll spew it out.
Sounds good.
Absolutely. So what first got you into wanting to be an entrepreneur?
I got to be honest. I don't even know if I knew what the word meant early on, but I would always do things somewhat hedonistically to make money. Like I'm 13 years old. I go swim at a swim meet in Mexico. I buy one of these switchblades. I come back to junior high and all the kids love it. So I get a ticket back to Mexico City as a 13-year-old, I might add. I buy a bunch of switchblades. I come back and I sell them at school. I buy them at $3 and $4, small and large, and I sell them at $15 and $18. So that was kind of the first, how do I make a little bit of money for doing, whatever the hell I want, right? But then along the way, I went to college in Tucson, Arizona at the U of A. And I'm sitting in my sophomore year, I'm sitting in a laundromat. I have a pocket full of quarters. I'm addicted at the time to Pac-Man. And I'm thinking, man, this place needs a video game. It's Pac-Man or something, right? So I call every laundromat in Tucson when I get back to my dorm room. And I say, you guys have video games? And they all said no. And I said, would you like one? And, a couple said, yeah. And I'm like, okay, I don't know where I was going to get the money, but I took my college funds. I went to an auction and I bought these used machines, like the arcades at the time. Again, this is the late 70s. They would have areas where they had filled with machines and a couple of machines that just never did anything. Yeah. So they sent them to the auction and sold them cheaper than I think it would have cost to buy them and the hardware. And I bought one of those and it started to make some quarters. Then I bought another and I kept switching them around because I'm sure the people that would go to laundromats would go, oh, good, something to do for the next 2 hours, right? And ultimately they'd go, what a piece of junk. They got to get rid of this trash, right? And of course they'd come back in a couple of weeks and there'd be a new piece of trash. So that was sort of the entree into entrepreneurship. It wasn't that, I got to find a way to make money. It was like, oh, I have a problem. I want to play video games. How do I solve that? And ironically, I couldn't even play my own games because if I would go to a laundromat and play the games, I'd be taking quarters away from myself. Yeah. Right? So it was to satisfy my need. It never really worked out that way. I ended up with like in television at the apartment or something where I was living.
Wow, that's pretty. So from there,
that's really cool. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll continue on, and you're welcome to stop me along the way. So from there, I I graduate college. I decide to sell the business and have them give me a couple of bucks every month just so that I can survive and not have to stress about, working, right? I mean, jumping into a job. So I'm in LA thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be a movie producer, director. That was the dream, right? Well, that didn't happen, but I did end up going on a travel film or with a travel crew. And I started doing travel films first as a PA, what they call a production assistant, and then moved my way up as, a sound guy, assistant director. And eventually I'm producing, right? And in the late 90s, we had done some stuff years earlier in Chile, in Latin America, and Chile had gone from a dictatorship with Pinochet to a democracy, right? So in the late 1880s and early 1990s, they added new television stations and a new TV network, which meant they needed content, right? So I called the people that did the production support services for us in Chile, and I said, listen, I want to come down there. Can you get me a meeting with the new network, right? I want to come in as this American producer and pitch a game show, which I did. And a couple of months later, we were on the air. It was a game show called Machos, which was focused pretty much on the younger demographic, because Chile at the time had a very young demographic. And most of the programming was government stuff, and it was really boring, and it wasn't for the kids. So it went over really well. And so about a year and a half into my stint there, somebody introduces me to this new nonlinear editing system where you can copy and paste digital, video clips and move them around like a Word document. And I thought, that is the coolest thing ever, right? I was amazed because I came from, cutting film celluloid with a razor blade, right? And so then somebody gives me a CD and they show me a virtual tour where I can take a mouse and I can look up and down and all around. And I thought, oh my God, I don't have to do travel films with 5 guys and 17 pieces of luggage. I want to do this. So I set up another company called World Travel Vision, specifically to produce virtual tours for hotels and destinations, right? So we would give them a CD-ROM, they'd take it to a trade show, and then the conferences. It was like the mid to late 90s, right? And so now they sit there and they say, okay, well, how do we get these new virtual tours on this new World Wide Web thingy? I'm like, I don't know, send them a CD-ROM, right? And of course, they said, yeah, they don't know what to do with it. There are no standards. And I'm like, all right, let me see what I can do to help. I know nothing about technology, right? So I hire somebody to create this cold fusion database to link to the different travel sites to give virtual tours for specific hotels. And while we're looking into this, we realized that, virtual tours are nice to have, right? But photos are need to have. And the early systems that would deliver the rates and the availability had no photos, right? And so the internet had a separate database where people would manually upload photos, and then hotel groups got mad because there were different standards and they weren't following the guidelines. And, it was a cluster, what. So I thought, okay, so let's figure out how, we're now delivering virtual tours. Let's figure out how we can yet again pivot and deliver the photos, because that's the need to have. So, I was an overnight success 24 years later when I sold the company for 8 figures because, every major hotel group and all the hotels in the world would use us. We would collect their photos, size, tag, categorize, and send to every travel site like Expedia, Booking, and Pepe's Travel. I mean, everybody. Oh, wow. So it was great business because it was a huge moat. But again, it was right place, right time, and an opportunity, and a shitload of hurdles and mountains that I had to overcome along the way because I really I don't think I was well educated in how to operate a business. I went back to college and I got a master's in entrepreneurship. I picked up a book called Traction, which changed my life. And I went, oh my God, this is what they mean when people would say, you got to hire the best people. And I'm thinking, I can't even afford to pay for the best people. No, you got to have a culture. I'm like, I don't know what that means, right? You got to have KPIs. I'm like, what's a KPI, right? I knew nothing. And so after years of slowly figuring this stuff out, learning it, making mistakes, we built it and we planted seeds and planted seeds and planted seeds. And finally they came to fruition. And, eventually we built a nice little software as a service company.
Wow. So you had no intention of getting into the
really
software
awesome.
business then?
That's exactly right.
That's the path that took you down. What you were trying to. I mean, that's just what your entrepreneurship basically. That's the path that took you down.
Absolutely right. I mean, I still don't know how to write a line of code. You know, you just look at it and like it's Dutch to me. But you know, I got really lucky and I hired a team they just left Microsoft. So I figured, okay, they know Microsoft, they know big numbers and scaling. Okay. And they were some Russian guys, right? And they ended up, I was their first client. And so I did a deal with them. I said, listen, I'll give you a little bit of equity in the company if you give it to me at like your cost. I don't want you to make any money off this. And they were amazing, right? And the problem was that was essentially my first tech marriage. And I didn't know that they were as good as they were until, you know, it happened again in India and other places. But they ended up growing massively in the 4 years that I had the contract. And I went from, you know, the first class citizen where I was getting all the love and attention to essentially relegated to a second class because, you know, there were 2,000 programmers at the end of 4 years, right? And I was just one of their many clients. But it's a learning lesson too. And you know, you got to hire a good CTO locally that knows how to evaluate and make sure that the developers in different countries, if you have them, are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
So just to take a step back for the field side, why travel? Like why travel basically?
Yeah, travel was easy. For really the primary reason is my dad was in the travel business, so I knew the travel business from him, and I would get some insights. But primarily, when I was 16, my dad sent my brother and 3 other teenage friends of ours to Honduras to search for a lost city in the jungles, which was a friggin' nightmare. And we thought, oh my God, he just wants to get rid of us and get us killed because we're going to die here in the jungles, right? And you know, it was a real enlightening experience. But a couple of months later, they sent ABC Sportsman had a film crew shooting some of the findings that we had found, the archaeological digs and stuff. And what ended up happening is there was a 24-year-old director. He was a hoot, still a friend of mine. And we had a great time. And I thought, this is so cool. This guy's traveling around the world. He's making money. He's having fun. He's not sitting behind a desk all day. This is what I want to do, right? And eventually, the film crew that I started working on was with him, where he was the director. And eventually we formed, his name was Mark, we formed Woodmark Productions. So that's kind of the connecting the dots, how it got to travel films and then the travel industry.
Very interesting.
That's really, really cool. Do you have any unique stories from any of your travels?
PG?
PG as possible.
That's up to you.
There are many stories. Well, let's see. Well, the biggest unique one was the one that I alluded to when I was 16 and going to Honduras to look for Ciudad Blanca, which is the white city. And we literally, I mean, my brother and I, we were, you know, initially sold by my father, who said, oh, it's going to be a great adventure. You guys are going to love it. You know, and we're young kids and we're thinking, yeah, it's going to be like an Indiana Jones type adventure. We're going to find a lost city and we're going to be on Johnny Carson. That's how old I am. And of course, when we got there and realized that it was nothing of the kind and it was one of the most unforgiving jungles. And I thought, oh my God, this is horrible. We're going to die here, right? And what's funny is we flew down on the Honduran airline at the time was called TAN. And the flight attendant was this short, stubby, relatively unattractive woman, right? And on the way back, 2 months later in the jungles with 5 guys, we had the same flight crew. And the way back, she was beautiful. She smelled so good, and the hair and the skin, and you're like, oh my God, your perspective really changes. You're completely cut off from, you know, any sort of luxuries for 2 months. That was about as clean as I imagine.
Out of curiosity, with no way to be able to do that.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, what it really does is it makes you appreciate the little things, like every single drop of water. Even though we were in a rainforest, it wasn't like the water was anywhere where you could just grab and drink, right? You'd have to collect it. And food was scarce. We had our mules get swept away with the beans and rice that we had on them. So we would have to eat pretty much anything that we could find. We were starving, we were thirsty, or we were always wet. So you really learn to appreciate the littlest things, food and a shelter and dry clothes and, my God, everything. Sorry, I interrupted you guys.
No, not at all. That was awesome. I was curious what it was like, the experience of actually selling your business, and then what advice you would have for other entrepreneurs that are trying to get their business to the point of exiting.
Got it. Okay. I'm really lucky. Did I mention that? Yeah, I did. What happened was, first of all, if you're considering selling the business, the first thing you got to do, and I tell this to business owners all the time, I say, talent is one thing, if you have a little bit of it, but that's not the primary thing. The primary things are really to be prepared and lucky if you expect to see opportunity, because you could be prepared and unlucky, you may never see it. You can be lucky and unprepared, you may never see it. So if you're talented, you're preparing, and you're lucky, there's a good chance you'll find opportunity, right? And so I would tell my employees years prior that I want them to imagine that we're going to set up a franchise in Europe. And they can never talk to us. So whatever we document, make sure it's clear for them to understand exactly what these things do, what connects to what. And these are living documents, right? We would connect to literally thousands of websites, and it was all via APIs, and they would update. So all of the stuff had to maintain up to date. The way we structured our processes, all of those things were well documented. I would have weekly meetings and I would explain everything to the team. They knew all the numbers, they knew the KPIs, everybody knew exactly where we were going and how we planned to get there. Now, I had not planned on selling the company when I did, but as we were growing, we were in a position of strength. Several people had approached us. And so one group of a multi-billion-dollar international company comes a knocking, and I say, listen, I'm always interested, but I had a number on my mirror for a decade, right? So I sat down and I thought to myself, how much money do I need to live the rest of my life without ever having to worry or work or stress? And then I doubled that because, I figured I'm dumb and, taxes and other shit. So let's put some padding there. That was my number, right? And so as it turned out, the company says, listen, we're very interested. And I said, yes, so am I. But, I think I need to be a little bit higher in my revenue because the multiplier for the EBITDA needs to be higher because, I got this number. And I told them the number and they walked away. And so a month later, they called me up and they fly in the CFO and the COO. And, they're from all over the world. And they start to throw out a bunch of numbers. And I say, guys, listen, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm making good money. I have no boss. I have no board. I have no debt. I sleep well at night. We're a SaaS company, which means, they're married to us. They're pretty much not going to leave us, right? By the way, this was a year before COVID. So who had any idea, right?
Right.
And so I said, listen, you will overpay today for something you'll underpay for tomorrow. Now, I believed that. And they looked at each other, must have been, 5 or 6 seconds, but it felt like a minute. And they finally looked at me and they said, fine, you got a deal. No investment banker. 60 days later, the lawyers worked out the contract and the money was in the bank. So my best advice is be in a position of strength. Look for a strategic buyer. In this case, the buyer had a strategic plan and we were a piece to that puzzle, right? So instead of building, which would take literally years. The technology wasn't the difficult part. It was integrating with all of the travel websites around the planet, right? That was huge. And then the major, 65,000 hotels, right? Not individual hotels, but hotel groups like Hilton and Wyndham and stuff, right? So all of that was the strategic thing. And, to build around and do all those connections would take them years. So they would pay a premium. it was a 20 times EBITDA, and I thought I needed to get somewhere between 8 and 10. So I got what I wanted.
Wow. So when you're thinking of selling, I guess, so your mindset was, let's say, different than other people who wanted to stay involved with the company. You were really looking to sell to go ahead and leave. You weren't thinking, well, hey, if I sell, but I also want, A, B, C, and D, for me personally. You were really looking just to go ahead and get completely out.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a tech company, and the world changes every 5 minutes in technology. So, what's going on today and with what's happening with AI, I think a couple of years from now, it'll be a different landscape again, right? And so if the opportunity presents itself, then you should certainly take advantage of it. And, they said, well, listen, we can do it in earn out. And I said, no, I'm not going to do an earn out. I had no interest in an earn out, which, is basically, if you hit certain numbers, we're going to give you, the monies you want. I said, it's all or nothing. I said, if we do certain things, you can pay the employees because I got the money I want. Now, the other thing that I did was I had what's called phantom stock for key employees, right? So the ones that I thought needed to be in the company after it was acquired, they had phantom stock, which meant they got a percentage of the sale, but they would vest over 2 years in getting that money. So if the company said, listen, we really like the CTO and the COO, and we don't want them to leave, even though they got a pile of money, no, the money goes in tranches every 6 months. So they're pretty much assured that they're going to keep those employees there for a couple of years. Now, if they want to get rid of the employees get the money right away because it's an escrow. So it was a win-win-win.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, you talk about the part about selling. What advice do you have for somebody that wants to start a business to potentially grow it? Not necessarily do they want to sell it, but what about just saying, hey, you know what? I really want to be my own boss. I'm tired of working for somebody else. I don't want to answer to anybody. I want to be the guy that gives the answers. So that's what you do.
Really upset the dogs now. Look at that. Oh my goodness. So the answer to the question.
He's giving away all your secrets.
Hey guys. Jeez. The dogs were upset. Must be a squirrel out there. So the answer to the question really is find a problem and solve it, right? Anybody who says, listen, I got to do something. We all know the statistics, and it's pretty bleak about what happens when people start businesses, right? If you are solving a problem, let's just say that it's significant enough that other people have the problem, or you're building a better mousetrap, great. But at the beginning, say yes to everything. I mean, I was a whore for nickels because I needed the money. So, anybody would come along, I'd say, sure, yeah, well, yes. And eventually when I figured out what I can do and win at, which was the photo thing, because, I started producing virtual tours, then I started distributing, then I'd give away the virtual tours for the distribution, then I would morph into pictures. So when you find what you're really capable of winning at, then you say no to everything else. So in the beginning, yes, you got to try to find out what opportunity is best or problem that you solve. You may not even know the problem exists until you're deep into it. So solve a problem, then focus maniacally on that, and plant seeds. Lots of planting of seeds. Communicate, see who the clients are, see what they want, etc. The other thing I would recommend is, that saying that you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with, is hang out with people that inspire and motivate you, right? Because if your friends are, punching a card and working 9 to 5 and coming home and sipping the beer and chugging chips and getting stoned, maybe you're going to be doing that too. But if they're more entrepreneurial and innovative and motivated and they want to do something more, it will also get you in that same mindset. So have a circle of friends. I mean, I'm not telling you to get rid of your, lazy butt friends, but, have a circle of friends that inspire you, find a problem and solve it, and then focus maniacally on that.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So at the point you exit the company, you decide to move on into producing. What was kind of, you'd mentioned it was kind of like a full circle moment. What was kind of the thing that made you decide, hey, this is the next chapter of my life. I'm going to really focus on this television producing?
Right. So, at the end of the day, when people say, "Oh, I'm gonna sell the company, I'm gonna relax on a beach or play golf or whatever they say they're gonna do," it's like, okay, great, but then in week 2 or 3, then what? Because most entrepreneurs are kind of like this ADD thing going on. It's like, I can't sit still, and then if they don't have a passion or purpose, even if you do it for free, then you're going to be bored out of your mind, and you're going to start, drinking heavily or something, right? So the answer to the question is, when I moved to Los Angeles 40 years earlier, longer now, and I wanted to produce and direct movies, I bought the rights to a book. The book was written by my father. He didn't plan on publishing it. It was kind of a memoir for a friend. My sister read it. She loved it. She sent it to me, and I went, oh my God, this is amazing. I was in tears. Called my dad. I said, can I buy it? I don't have a lot of money. I'll give you $1. I buy the rights. And then I think to myself, that is really narcissistic of me. So I call a friend of mine in LA who at the time was producing a movie. And I said, you got to read this because I want to know it's my dad. I don't know if it's any good, right? And he says, Henry, I'm in the middle of something. And I said, take your time. 3 days later, he calls me up. He goes, I couldn't put it down. I love it. We're meant to do this. And I'm like, yay, let's do it. And of course, that didn't happen. He went off and got into real estate. I went to Latin America to produce the game shows. And ultimately, we said, one of these days, we're going to do this. So when I sell the tech company, I'm going to publish the book, get awareness, and then we're going to develop the series. So you're like, okay, what is all this excitement about? The book is called The Reincarnation of Marie, and it is based on a true story. There is a woman who lived in the late 1800s. She wrote a journal between 14 and 24. She died at 24. And 2 years after her death, they published her journal. And it was an international bestseller because she would write things very candidly about, women's sexuality and masturbation and things that women at the time did not talk about, right? So it was hugely popular. 70 years later, this guy buys the journal, reads it, and falls in love with her. Realizes, this is kind of crazy. I've lost my mind. I've fallen in love with a woman who's dead. This is not right, right? And eventually he finds her reincarnation, thus the reincarnation of Marie. Now, the working title of the series, which is in development now, is called Slippin', which is essentially slipping through time, whether it's time travel, whether it's reincarnation, whether it's metaverse, but you're slipping somewhere into a different timeline, right? And it explores the various people in Marie's timeline and how they interact and weave into our protagonist, his name is Jonathan's, timeline, right? And we kind of broach the topics of reincarnation and karma and sins of the father and whether soulmates really exist. And if they do you see them in every life? Or is that, love and hate, two sides of the same coin where you had somebody and you met them, but you hated them, but they really were yours? I mean, there's a lot of trippy things. And so that's essentially the series.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
That's cool. When do you expect the series to debut and where can people find it?
Well, if I had the answer to that, I'd be smarter than I am. So, this is a funky business, mm-hmm. the entertainment business. So what happens is I put the book out 2 months ago to essentially start to develop a little bit of awareness, because usually people will open a door if there's a book involved, right? The intellectual property. So once the book gets a little bit of traction, we just finished what's called a pitch deck, and the pitch deck includes sort of what's going on with the characters, who the characters, descriptions are and the plot and stuff like that. We go out to showrunners, producers, if you will, that have done similar type shows, right? And then you say, we'd love to attract and, find if you think this is attractive and attach you to this, right? And then they work with, potential directors and casts and put together the budget, and then they take it in like a package to the streamers. Now, It could be a few months before that this happens in, my fantasy world, or it could take years. And the business has slowed down a little bit since craziness a couple of years ago. And then they had the writers' strike, so they've cut back on things. So, it's a cyclical cycle. And, we're looking at different options to see where it can go. And fortunately, I'm not in a rush to I got to do this tomorrow or I'm going to starve.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure you want to make sure that you perfect it, especially being that this is something that your dad worked on. Now, with that being said, how difficult is it to take something like this? Like, for anybody that's listening that might have a dream of, making their own show or publishing their own movie or whatnot, how difficult is it to take something that's written in novel form or book form like your dad wrote and then transpose it into being a television show? Because I'm sure you probably have to break it up into some form or even rewrite certain segments of it. How hard was that for you to kind of transfer the thing?
Yeah. Well, for me, it was really easy because I'm not a writer and I didn't do crap on it except hand it over. But what happened was 40 years ago when my partner Doug read it, he thought it was so cool. And he wrote a movie, right? 2-hour movie. And it was like going back and forth, different timelines and different things. And it was like, oh my God, I gotta do mushrooms to figure this out, right? And this was 40 years ago. Now, this is kind of the standard, lay out all the pieces of the puzzle and it all comes together in the end. But at the time I was like, man, I like simple, linear, A, B, C, D, right? Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, the world has changed. Movies are no longer the go-to. It's now streaming. And now that we can get into, streamers, let's end up doing a 6-part series where it's a much deeper dive, right? And we go back and we see the intricacies of each and all those lives and how they impact the current lives, right? Because if you say, listen, if I'm doing everything right, but my life is miserable, what did I do wrong in a previous life, right? Or why am I so blessed? I must have done something good in my last life, that type of thing. And there are actual studies about, DNA inherited, things, traumas that happen in, grandparents are DNA'd in their grandchildren. So there's some really interesting things, right? So the answer to the question is, there are 3.5 million books or something a year that are published. So, you got to be on some list. You got to be lucky to be, and I'm out there talking to people and pitching. Hopefully, I'll get somewhere, but it's a lot of planting seeds and hoping that you can get some traction with it. I was in LA last week meeting with some producers to talk about, options. And, I'm just out there making myself heard so that eventually somebody will take notice and we'll get there. And like I said, could take a couple of months, could take a couple of years.
It's really cool. Out of curiosity, I know that you've been nominated for an Emmy. What's that process like? Any stories you can tell about that specific process when you went through it?
Sure. Yeah, it's actually 4 Emmy nominations. I've been nominated, but I've never won. And they were local area Emmys, which is, I don't want to belittle it because it was pretty cool if I actually had a trophy to hold up and go, look at this, right? When I was in LA, for a couple of months, I was working at a TV station, Telemundo, which is the Spanish language network, right? And I did some producing of a little series called Valores Hispanos, which is, Hispanic celebrities types, right? And it was really cool. So I got 2 Emmy nominations for that, for the producing and the editing. And then when I came back from Chile and I started figuring out what I'm going to do here, I was working at another television station here, and I got something for a series called A Tan to Die For, which was about, people getting tanned and then getting cancer and, all this kinds of stuff like that. So they were nominations for local area, mostly TV stuff and documentary stuff like that. And so all I have is a certificate that I think is stashed somewhere. I don't even know where. So one of these days I'll get a real one for slipping.
There you go. So
yeah,
for your future, absolutely. What you're looking at, do you think will slipping have to be out there before you try and look to do a second stream event, or do you kind of say, "Wow, I got one. Let me start working on another one this way in case this one hits and they like my stuff. I got another one that I could follow up with."
Right. Michael, I'm getting old, man. How old do you want me to be? The answer to the question is it's a series that involves reincarnated souls, which means they can go on forever, right? You can have historical figures, or you can have future figures, or you can have figures at any place in time that find each other, right? Could be male, female, male, male. It doesn't matter. You know, it could be an animal lovers. I don't care. But the reality is, if the series is well received, then it gets picked up and it goes into a season 2. So hopefully it's well done enough to people go, listen, it's a very niche audience in the sense that somebody who likes, you know, historical fiction, paranormal romance, and this type of, you know, spooky time travel stuff. It's got a sci-fi bend, but when you talk about Marie, she really existed, right? And then you talk about all of the other intricacies and you're like, yeah, I can see how this could be a reality type thing. Now, the story was written by my father. He claimed he wrote it in tribute and as a result of hearing the story from his friend. Now, he died 14 years ago, so we don't know the actual truth, but we now think maybe he was talking about, you know, air quotes, my friend fell in love with this woman and it was actually him in his deluded, you know, romantic state. I don't know, right? But the idea is it can go on forever.
That's really cool. So we have a couple segments we like to do towards the end of the show. The first one's called No Dumb Questions, where we allow an audience member to submit a question for a future guest. This week, the question is, how difficult is the barrier of entry to Hollywood on the production / behind the scenes type role compared to people that are more in front of the camera, acting, singing, and performing?
Yeah, well, both of them are tough, but I think that, you know, it's a challenge in any, well, you know, you can start behind the scenes and get paid bullshit wages as a PA, a production assistant, or, you know, you've got a lot of people that do craft work or gaffer or things like that do fairly well, but on that production, right? And if the production stops, then they're, you know, having to look for another gig, right? So, you know, this is one of those things where if I know, well, since I know now what I know, I probably wouldn't have done it then, and I didn't try it because I didn't know how. But it's a challenge because it's like the 1% is really, in most art worlds, is really the ones that are making a pretty good living, right? Then there are a lot of other people who are romantically fascinated with that industry, as am I. But it's hard to make a really good living that way. I mean, you're working side hustles so that you can pay the bills when you're not working on a set, right? Behind the scenes, or even in front of the scenes as well. And now with streaming, it gets even more challenging because anybody with an iPhone and a computer can be a production company, really. It just depends on the material, the lighting, and, you know, the acting.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, it's true you say about, you know, we have YouTube channels and stuff like that. And if you have, you know, that type of stuff available to you, you know, you can go ahead and get, you know, a little bit of a following and so on and so forth. And to your point, you know, I mean, like I said, I have a YouTube channel, so I'm in a way, you know, I produce my own kind of stuff and everything. And now I know I suck at it.
No, but you never know. I mean, there are people out there doing their things just out of passion, and, you know, something might happen and they go viral. You know, You never know. Somebody important influencer sees it, tags it, posts it, or whatever, and all of a sudden it's huge. So that's why plant the seeds. You know, not everybody is going to go viral, but, you know, the few that do, good for them.
Yeah,
for sure.
Amen to that.
Absolutely. Another segment we have is we have to ask, but you do not have to answer. And the question we have for you today is, what's the most incredible / insane thing you've ever experienced in all of your years working as a producer?
Man, that mind is going a mile a minute.
Yeah. Where do I start? Most incredible and insane. I mean, let's be clear. I produce a game show in Chile called Machos for young contestants on a dating show. So, I had an affinity for Latin women, and I married a Venezuelan woman eventually. So, that was sort of self-serving as well, not just the opportunity, but the hedonistic, chasing Latin women and having them come in. I'm not going to say casting couch or anything, but this is the 90s, right? So this is a different world.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That's all I'm going to say.
That's all you got.
I just still think it's incredible that your father went ahead and put you, your brother, and some friends as teenagers on a plane. Because I could never imagine, like as a father myself, I would just think, my kids, what their ages they are, and think, 8-10 years ago of saying, hey, here's some plane tickets, go ahead and have fun. I could not imagine doing that in today's world. Look, I'm not saying it doesn't get done, but for me personally, I don't know if I'd be able to go ahead and do that. I mean,
this was 1976, right?
Yeah.
I was 16. I had no clue. He hired a guy as a guide that he had never met, who was an ex-Marine snake hunter, and he was chasing what's called fer de lance, the really one of the deadliest snakes in the world. But we found out later, because he was arrested, he was getting big crebo snakes, like these big boas, like 10, 12 feet long. He would kill them, gut them, fill them with cocaine, put them at the bottom of the crate, and put fer de lances on the top. And then people would look in and see these slithering poisonous snakes. They wouldn't go and touch the ones on the bottom.
Right.
That's how he would bring drugs into the country. So we didn't know any of this stuff when we were down there. And he's the only one with a gun. And we thought he threatened to kill us. And then we had a plan to kill him. And yeah, it was a real sort of Lord of the Flies moment, if you will.
I can imagine. I'm just picturing a guy looking like Danny Trejo with a big old machete.
Definitely. Yeah, that's all we had were knives and a machete.
Wow.
That's really cool. Michael, do you have any final questions before we let Henry go today?
No, I'm good. I thought, Henry, thanks a lot for your time. We definitely appreciate you giving us of your time. We know it's something that is a valuable commodity in everybody's life, no matter, whether you're an entrepreneur or not entrepreneur. It doesn't make a difference. Time is something you can't get back. So we appreciate you spending the time with us.
Thanks, guys. I'll add one more thing. If anybody's interested to see where the book, it's being sold a bunch of places, and the series is in development, you can go to mariethestory.com, and there's some information on all of that stuff. And if you want, you can put it in the show notes. It's mariethestory.com, and it'll give you all the 411.
Nice.
Yep, that'll be down in the description anywhere this is released. And is there anywhere else, like social media or anything like that, you'd like people to follow you?
Yeah, on the bottom of the page, there's my LinkedIn and my Facebook and my Instagram. So those are the three places that I am overloaded with, because I can't do anything more. I'm just like, it keeps up with all this stuff, right?
Tell me about it.
Totally understandable. Well, again, I appreciate your time today, Henry. This has been a lot of fun for us, and we wish you nothing but the best of luck, and we're really looking forward to seeing it when it's actually on our TV screens. It's going to be amazing.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. I would appreciate you following Henry's journey, going and supporting the show when it comes out. If you're into the book, make sure you pick up a copy and read it before the show comes out. Follow Michael over on Huddle Card Collection. Make sure you follow Collecting Profit Wednesday evenings at 10 p.m. And come subscribe to Picksburgh, so that way you can see how dead sexy we all are. So till the next time, guys, God bless you.
Thanks.
Hope you have a good
Ciao.
day. The city is